was a typical Friday morning at the Fulton County Courthouse. The sound of footsteps and murmurs filled the halls. But in an instant, the tranquility was shattered. Gene Nichols, a defendant with a promising football career and a charming smile, transformed into a force of destruction. With a calculated gaze, he launched a brutal attack in the courtroom, leaving a trail of devastation.
Now, there is much more that we talked to Brian Nichols about. Was there almost a fifth murder victim?
The sound of gunfire echoed through the corridors, sending shockwaves through the very heart of justice.
He was a conniving, vicious, cold-blooded, remorseless, evil, and extremely dangerous killer.
As the dust settled, the questions began to swirl. What drove this charismatic athlete to snap? Was it a calculated act of revenge, a desperate attempt to escape, or the tragic unraveling of a troubled mind? Let's find out. Before the violence. Chaos exploded in the courtroom like a ticking time bomb, as Brian Nichols' pent-up rage unleashed a bloody rampage, leaving a trail of devastation in its wake. The echoes of that fateful day still linger, haunting us with a single burning question. What dark forces drove this man to commit such unspeakable violence? To unravel the mystery, let's rewind the tape to a crisp winter morning in Austin, Texas, on February 10th, 1971. The city was alive with vibrant energy, and in a small corner of it, Brian Nichols took his first breath. It was a day like any other, but one that would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to tragedy. Sandra and Gene Nichols welcomed their youngest child, Brian, with open arms, completing their picture-perfect family of 5. The Nichols family seemed like the epitome of suburban bliss, with 2 older sisters, a loving mother, and a father who provided for their every need. But beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to form. As a young boy, Brian was a whirlwind of energy and charm, always making his family laugh with his quick wit and mischievous grin. He spent his childhood playing sports, exploring the outdoors, and getting into all sorts of adventures with his sisters. The family would often take road trips to visit relatives, and Brian loved listening to his parents' stories about their own childhoods. Meanwhile, as he entered his teenage years, the family's facade began to crumble. His parents' marriage began to unravel, and they eventually divorced when Brian was around 10 years old. When his parents' marriage imploded, Brian's world was shattered. The once peaceful home was now a war zone, with Brian caught in the crossfire. The happy family he knew was reduced to a battleground, leaving him to navigate the treacherous terrain of his parents' shattered dreams and broken promises. The split sent shockwaves through the family, leaving Brian to pick up the pieces and find a way to survive the devastation. Despite the challenges, Brian found solace in sports and music. He became a talented football and basketball player. He also developed a passion for hip-hop and rap music, spending hours listening to artists like Tupac Shakur and the Notorious B.I.G. As Brian stormed through his teenage years, a rebellious spirit began to emerge. He tested limits, defied authority, and flirted with trouble, all while flashing a disarming smile that could charm his way out of sticky situations. This charismatic spark drew a loyal crew of friends to his side, but also landed him in hot water more than once. On a sunny day in Baltimore, Maryland, young Brian walked across the stage, proudly receiving his diploma from Cardinal Gibbons School in 1989. His family beamed with pride, capturing the moment with snapshots and cheers. Little did they know, this moment marked the beginning of a journey that will take Brian down a path of athleticism, intensity, and ultimately, infamy. When Brian arrived at Kutztown University of Pennsylvania, his fierce passion for football exploded onto the football field. His talent and tenacity had already made waves in his high school league, earning him recognition and accolades. Now, as he clashed with opponents on the college field, his intensity and strength left a lasting impression. Brian's football prowess was undeniable, but hints of his troubled past and penchant for pushing boundaries lingered, foreshadowing a tumultuous journey ahead. His imposing stature, standing at 6 feet 1 inch and weighing 210 pounds, established him as a formidable presence. His teammates, like Nick Pergine, recall his intimidating presence and mastery of martial arts, earning him a reputation as a formidable opponent. Coach Jake Williams compared Brian's impressive build to that of NFL star John Mobley, who also suited up for the university. Brian's teammates looked up to him, and his opponents tremble at the sight of him. But beneath the surface, a complex individual is taking shape, one whose future actions will shock the nation. The arrest. Brian's time at university was marked by a string of arrests. In 1990, a violent incident in a dining hall led to charges of terroristic threats, assault, and harassment. He pleaded guilty to lesser charges, but the pattern continued. The next year, Brian was arrested twice in a month for trespassing, criminal mischief, and disorderly conduct. Though the charges were dropped, his behavior remained concerning. Despite his troubles, Brian's football talent earned him a spot on the team at Newbury College, where he played from 1992 to 1993. However, his criminal behavior persisted, and he was kicked off the team for stealing from a dorm room. After dropping out of college, Brian moved to Georgia in 1995 and started a new life. He landed a high-paying job at Hewlett-Packard, working as a Unix systems engineer for 8 years. His last employment was as a computer engineer for a UPS subsidiary, where he earned a 6-figure income and attended church regularly. But in 2004, Brian's dark side resurfaced. He was arrested for the assault of his ex-girlfriend, who had started dating a minister from their church. Brian forced his way into her home, bound her with duct tape, and took advantage of her at gunpoint. The charges against him were staggering. It included a sexual assault charge, aggravated assault, aggravated sodomy, burglary, false imprisonment, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime. As the trial drew near, the tension built like a pressure cooker ready to explode. Brian declared his determination to avoid conviction, saying he would not go down lying down. His words were seen as a chilling warning, a declaration of his defiance and desperation in the face of a new trial and the possibility of a lifetime behind bars. His friends whispered warnings to the district attorney's office, fearing he might attempt a daring escape. Brian's mother, sensing her son's desperation, emailed the sheriff's office, urging them to beware of his potential to disarm an officer. As the trial began, the atmosphere grew more charged. Just 2 days before the crime spree, deputies escorting Brian discovered 2 makeshift weapons hidden in his shoes. Brian's taunts in court further inflamed the situation. He sarcastically complimented the prosecutors on their performance, his confidence faltering as his case deteriorated. Sensing the growing threat, Judge Barnes convened an emergency meeting with counsel to request additional security measures for Brian's testimony. In a high-stakes moment where a life sentence loomed, the tension crackled, foreshadowing a startling and tragic twist of fate. Gun battle in the courtroom. March 11, 2005, was a day that would go down in infamy at the Fulton County Courthouse. It was a typical morning at the Fulton County Justice Tower until Brian brutally attacked Deputy Cynthia Hall at 5:54 a.m. Deputy Cynthia Hall was escorting Brian from the basement detention area to a holding cell on the 8th floor, a routine task that would soon turn deadly. Tragically, Hall made a critical error. She failed to require Brian to wear leg shackles, despite the fact that he had been caught with door hinges hidden in his shoes just the day before. This oversight would prove to be a fatal mistake, as Brian was able to use his unrestrained freedom to launch an attack on Hall and begin his rampage. In a sudden and violent outburst, Brian overpowered Deputy Cynthia Hall, wrenching her gun belt from her waist and slamming her into a nearby cell. He locked the door behind her, trapping her inside. With Cynthia neutralized, Brian stormed into Judge Roland W. Barnes's private chambers, his gun waving wildly as he took aim at the terrified occupants. Case managers Susan Christie and Gina Clark Thomas cowered in fear, alongside attorney David Allman, as Brian barked demands to reveal the whereabouts of Judge Barnes. Just then, Sergeant Grantley White, the court bailiff, burst into the room, only to be met with the cold steel of Brian's gun trained squarely on him. The situation quickly escalated, leaving the staff in the chambers at the mercy of Brian, who was now armed and dangerous. Brian burst into courtroom 8F through a door behind the judge's bench, his gun drawn and ready. Judge Barnes, presiding over a civil trial, never stood a chance. Brian fired a single shot at close range, striking the judge in the back of the head and killing him instantly. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the courtroom as Brian scanned the prosecution table, his eyes searching for his targets. Realizing the assistant district attorneys he sought were absent, he turned his attention to Julie Brando, the court reporter, and shot her in the head. Sergeant White, who had been forced into the bathroom, sprang into action, grabbing his radio to send out a desperate mayday call. "Shots fired!" he yelled into the radio, his voice steady despite the chaos. Brian, meanwhile, stormed out of the courtroom, his gun still smoking. He raced into a side room, searching for his ex-girlfriend whom he took advantage of, but she was nowhere to be found. As Brian burst out of the emergency stairwell, the door alarm blared like a siren, alerting everyone in the vicinity. He fired his gun into the air, sending pedestrians on Martin Luther King Drive scrambling for cover like ants from a disturbed nest. The sound of gunfire echoed off the buildings as Brain sprinted down the stairs, his feet pounding the concrete like a drumbeat. Sergeant Hoyt Teasley, responding to the alarm, spotted Brian as he emerged from the stairwell like a jack-in-the-box. The escape. Without a moment's hesitation, Teasley launched himself into a heart-pounding pursuit, thundering down 7 flights of stairs at breakneck speed, his feet pounding the worn steps of the old courthouse. He burst through the doors, with unwavering resolve to capture Brian. The 2 men tore onto Martin Luther King Drive, their footsteps pounding the pavement like a rhythmic drumbeat as they weaved through the crowded street. In a flash of violence, Brian turned and fired 2 shots at Sergeant Teasley, striking him in the abdomen before he could even draw his gun. Teasley crumpled to the ground like a puppet with its strings cut, and Brian fled the scene like a ghost. In the midst of this mayhem, Brian's escape became a frenzied and violent spectacle. He carjacked 5 vehicles in the underground parking garage, including Deputy Solicitor General Dwayne Cooper's 2002 Mazda Tribute, leaving a trail of terrified drivers in his wake. Larry McCrary, a witness who worked in the Fulton County Juvenile Court, saw Brian fleeing and gave chase, parking his vehicle to block the entrance and exit to the parking deck and flagging down 3 Atlanta police officers. Brian, a cunning adversary, emerged from the parking deck and approached a tow truck parked at the intersection of Peachtree and Wall Streets. With a calm demeanor, he aimed his gun at the driver, Durante Franklin, and demanded he exit the vehicle. Brian seized control of the truck, careening away with wild abandon. He navigated northbound on Peachtree Street, made a turn onto Walton Street, ignoring the one-way traffic sign, and entered the Imperial parking garage on Cone Street, with the stealth of a rat seeking refuge. On the 4th floor of the garage, Brian hijacked a 2004 Mercury Sable belonging to Almeida Kilgo, who was a software developer at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Brian pointed his gun at Kilgo and demanded she move to the passenger seat. His eyes blazed with a fierce intensity, and he warned her he wasn't joking, showing her the blood on his hands. He drove a short distance, then stopped and ordered her into the trunk. However, Kilgo managed to escape and flee to freedom. Police suspected Nichols abandoned his final stolen car, a Honda, on the same parking deck where it was first taken, possibly to hijack another vehicle with a less vigilant owner. The National Collegiate Athletic Association tournament at the Georgia Dome created a challenging environment for the investigation, with thousands of visitors in the area, making it difficult to identify potential missing persons or stolen vehicles. Security cameras showed Brian putting on a jacket from one of the stolen cars and disappearing on a lower level of the parking deck. Although his escape route remained unclear, the manhunt was intense enough to feature Nichols on America's Most Wanted that night, broadcasting his description to the nation. Later that day, the Fulton County District Attorney's Office made a shocking announcement. They had received a chilling 911 call from a person claiming to be Brian. In a menacing threat, he vowed to kill the prosecutors handling his case, Gail Abramson and Joshi. This chilling warning set off a massive and intense manhunt, one of the largest in Atlanta's history. With the city on high alert, law enforcement raced against time to apprehend the dangerous fugitive before he could carry out his threats. The situation was tense and terrifying, leaving everyone on edge, wondering what would happen next. The aftermath Brian's rampage was devastating. Judge Barnes and Julie Brando lay dead, and Sergeant Teasley was pronounced dead on arrival at Grady Memorial Hospital. As the chaos unfolded, Deputy Cynthia suffered severe injuries, including brain damage, facial fractures, and a deep gash on her forehead. Although she was critically injured, she miraculously survived. The capture and end of the rampage? In a state of complete lockdown, hundreds of police officers, cruisers, and helicopters swarmed the streets, searching for Brian. The city of Atlanta was in chaos, with roadblocks and checkpoints at major intersections. Even off-duty police officers joined the search, leaving no stone unturned. The Georgia governor announced a $65,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of Brian. People inside the courthouse were trapped, unable to leave until the all-clear is given. Meanwhile, a witness named Michael Taylor came forward, describing Brian's appearance on a MARTA train. Taylor was the only person on the train with Brian, who was wearing a jacket that didn't fit and sweating profusely. Surveillance video confirmed her account, showing Brian walking through the station at 9:57 a.m. Brian's violent spree continued. He attacked 2 people and killed Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent David G. Willem. He then kidnapped Ashley Smith, holding her hostage for several hours. The city was in a state of panic as police launched a massive search for Brian. The following day, on March 12, 2005, search efforts finally led them to the Bridgewater Apartments in Duluth, Georgia, a suburb located 27 miles north of Atlanta. Thanks to the swift and courageous actions of Ashley, Brian's reign of terror was finally brought to an end. From the safety of her Duluth, Georgia apartment, Ashley's calm and steady voice was a beacon of hope as she dialed 911, alerting police to Brian's whereabouts. With precision and speed, law enforcement responded, storming into the apartment and cornering the fugitive. With his rage finally exhausted, Brian finally surrendered peacefully, and his reign of terror was finally brought to a close. The man who had sparked such fear and chaos just days before was now meekly handed over to authorities, marking a welcome end to the violence and bloodshed. As authorities combed through the apartment, they found a stash of stolen firearms and Special Agent Wilhelm's wallet. The stolen truck was discovered just 2 miles away, a tantalizing clue that had finally led police to Brian's doorstep. Before the raid, Ashley had been held hostage by Brian for a harrowing 7 hours, forced to endure his erratic behavior at gunpoint. Yet, in a remarkable display of courage and quick thinking, she managed to gain Brian's trust by offering him methamphetamine and reading aloud from The Purpose-Driven Life. She opened up about the tragic loss of her husband and her own near-fatal car accident. As she prepared pancakes for breakfast, Brian surprisingly allowed her to leave and visit her daughter, and Ashley seized the opportunity to contact the authorities. Her bravery and quick thinking earned her a reward, but more importantly, helped bring an end to Brian's violent spree. In recognition of her bravery, Smith was rewarded with a total of $70,000 in reward money, generously donated by various sources. The United States Marshal's Office contributed $25,000, while the FBI gave $20,000. Additionally, the Georgia Governor's Office awarded her $10,000, and the Georgia Sheriff's Association, Georgia Fraternal Order of Police, and the City of Atlanta each donated $5,000. Before this, she had already received $2,500 from the Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police. As Brian was whisked away to an FBI field office in Decatur, Georgia, and later to an Atlanta police station, he finally confessed to his crimes on video, detailing the events of his violent rampage. Indictment and trial. Brian's journey to justice began at an FBI field office in Decatur, Georgia, where he faced federal charges for possessing a firearm as a person under indictment. The scene then shifted to the Atlanta police station, where Detective Vincent Velasquez sat him down for a revealing interview. With cameras rolling, Brian recounted his chilling crimes in vivid detail, from attacking a female deputy and stealing her weapon to unleashing a deadly shooting spree at the courthouse that claimed the lives of a judge, court reporter, sheriff's sergeant, and federal agent. He even confessed to holding Ashley Smith hostage, a harrowing ordeal that left her shaken. Brian's meticulous confession was a stark contrast to his lack of remorse, a jarring disconnect that would become a hallmark of his trial. The proceedings were marred by controversy, with debates raging over security lapses in public buildings and Brian's mental fitness to stand trial. In the aftermath, courthouse security practices came under scrutiny, leading to the installation of cameras in all courtrooms and secure doors in holding cells. The trial was delayed due to funding disputes, as the defense team claimed they lacked sufficient resources to adequately represent Brian. Meanwhile, the prosecution pursued the death penalty, which made Brian the most costly defendant in Georgia's history. The case ultimately incurred expenses exceeding $5 million, split between the prosecution and defense. Brian's family was shocked by his actions, with his mother learning about the incident while working in Africa. His brother, Mark, was deeply affected by the incident, and his father, Gene, acknowledged that his son was mentally ill at the time of the shooting. As the family held their breath, hoping for a life sentence to spare Brian from the ultimate punishment, a dramatic twist was unfolding. On May 5, 2005, the tide of fate turned, and Brian's violent odyssey took a decisive turn. A Fulton County grand jury delivered a crushing blow, slapping him with 54 charges against him, including murder, kidnapping, and armed robbery. The legal battle intensified as Brian initially pleaded not guilty, but his lawyers subtly hinted at a mental health defense, setting the stage for a gripping psychological showdown. Little did they know, the prosecution had a trump card: the death penalty. Initially, the trial was set for July 2005 in the same courtroom where the heinous murders took place, a setting that would have undoubtedly stirred up intense emotions. However, Superior Court Judge James Botiford acknowledged the potential bias and wisely ordered a change of venue, relocating the trial to a new location. This prudent decision was rooted in the principle of fundamental fairness, which prioritizes an impartial and unbiased trial, free from the emotional burden of the crime scene, to ensure a just and fair outcome. But Brian had other plans. While awaiting trial, he was caught plotting another escape and was promptly transferred to DeKalb County Jail in October 2006. Finally, on September 22, 2008, the trial began in Atlanta Municipal Court. Brian pleaded not guilty because of insanity, but the prosecution was ready to debunk his claims. Audio recordings of the murders were played, and witnesses testified that Brian showed no signs of mental instability during his previous trial for a serious offense. Brian himself admitted to the shootings, but claimed Special Agent Wilhelm had pointed a gun at him first. However, forensic evidence revealed a different story. Wilhelm was shot while kneeling, with injuries indicating he wasn't holding a gun. The trial was a gripping game of cat and mouse, with the truth slowly unraveling. Brian's trial and sentencing. With the eyes of the nation upon them, Brian's lawyers gambled on an unorthodox defense. Brian's defense team argued that their client was insane and shouldn't be held accountable for his actions. They pointed to his history of depression and suicidal thoughts after a rough breakup with his girlfriend. Psychology experts took the stand, revealing Brian's disturbing beliefs, including his conviction that white people were out to eradicate the black race. The jury was left to ponder. Was Brian a victim of his twisted mind, or a master manipulator? Several judges withdrew themselves from the case due to their friendship with the murdered Judge Roland Barnes. Judge Hilton Fuller took over, but later disqualified himself due to concerns about judicial impartiality. The case was then handed over to Superior Court Judge James Botiford. Brian attempted to escape and allegedly plotted another escape attempt. An investigation revealed that Brian had received help from his girlfriend, 2 deputies, a paralegal, and his brother. The trial commenced in Atlanta Municipal Court, where Brian entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, setting the stage for a complex and riveting legal battle. His defense team posited that he was under the delusion of being at war with the government, but the prosecution countered with compelling evidence suggesting Brian was fully cognizant of his actions and had meticulously planned the attack. Building on this foundation, the prosecution sought to dismantle the defense's insanity plea, presenting a wealth of evidence that Brian was in full control of his faculties. Gail Abramson, a former prosecutor, testified that she observed no indications of mental illness during Brian's 2005 trials, a crucial point that bolstered the prosecution's case. Over 17 days, the prosecution presented a robust case, calling 76 witnesses and displaying graphic autopsy photos of Brian's 4 victims, further solidifying their argument. In a strategic countermove, the defense aimed to portray Brian as mentally unstable, citing a traumatic childhood and a devastating breakup with his girlfriend that precipitated a downward spiral. To substantiate their claim, they called upon Brian's former girlfriend and a psychiatrist to testify about his mental state. The former girlfriend recounted a harrowing incident in which Brian entered her home armed and threatened her, a chilling account that highlighted his instability. Attorney Barry Hazen testified about Brian's increasingly erratic behavior and dangerous tendencies, while psychiatrist Mark Cunningham presented a revealing college essay written by Brian, outlining his beliefs about racial persecution and violence, further underscoring the defense's argument. After 12 hours of deliberation, the verdict was in. Brian was found guilty on all 54 counts. On December 13, 2008, Judge Botiford handed down the maximum sentence, multiple life terms with no chance of parole. Brian dodged the death penalty by a hair, thanks to a single juror who refused to condemn him to death. The story didn't end there. Family members of the victims filed civil lawsuits against Fulton County, seeking justice and compensation for their loved ones. Judge Barnes's widow won a whopping $5.2 million, while Christina Schulte, Julie Ann Brandau's daughter, received $5 million. And then there's Ashley, the brave woman who outsmarted Brian and helped bring him to justice. She wrote a book about her harrowing experience, Unlikely Angel, which was adapted into the film Captive in 2015, starring David Oyelowo as Brian. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.